Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Now, before I begin, let me remind you that in approximately 3 weeks, I'll begin a review of Joe Simpson's book entitled Saved as Through Fire, The Restoration of All Things Back to God. Joe Simpson has been a dispensationalist, an amillennialist. He's been this, he's been that. I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. I'm just simply pointing that out. But nonetheless, he was a preterist for a short period of time, and he's now a partial preterist. And he has stated that in this book, which presents a universalist perspective, that he has solved the conundrum, the riddle, the puzzle, if you please, concerning all of the time statements of eminence about the coming of the Lord in the New Testament, and balances that out and uses that in a way to supposedly prove the deity of Christ, and yet at the same time maintain a futurist eschatology. I can tell you that from my scanning of the book so far, he has not even come close to demonstrating that. Certainly he hasn't proven his case in regard to universalism, as I have scanned what he has to say. Now, make no mistake, Joe is a well-read guy. I mean, he's read a lot of material. And so it's not as if he has approached the subject lightly, not as if he has approached the subject without some careful thought. I'm just simply saying that my review of it so far, my reading of it so far, tells me that it is not a convincing presentation. But we'll discuss that in approximately 3 weeks. All right. So we have discussed the Isaiah chapter 65 as it relates to the coming of the bridegroom for the wedding. Now, I want you to realize and to focus on the fact that in Isaiah 65, the Lord predicted the coming of the New Jerusalem. This is eschatological to the core because John in Revelation chapter 21, 1-3 said, "The first heaven and the first earth passed away, and I saw a new Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven, adorned as a bride for her husband." Now, here's the New Jerusalem as the bride. And someone may say, oh, well, yeah, but in Matthew 25, that's Jesus coming. Well, that's a false dichotomy. It's a false contrast. It's not either or. For Christ to come would bring the New Jerusalem. For Christ to come for the wedding is the time of the wedding with the New Jerusalem. Now, what we find in Isaiah chapter 65, and today will be our last video on Isaiah 65. We're going to go to chapter 66 next. And in Isaiah 65, let's remember that the context for the coming of the New Jerusalem is, first of all, the wedding banquet of Isaiah 65, verse 13 and following. "My servant shall eat, you shall be hungry. My servant shall drink, you shall be thirsty." On and on it goes. And then he says, here in the context of this good news, bad news, the good news is there's going to be a wedding banquet. The bad news is the Lord God will slay you. That's Old Covenant Israel. It's not the church. It's Old Covenant Israel. Flowing directly from that destruction is the new heaven and the new earth. I shared with you how the connective particle of verse 17 ties the promise of the new creation, the New Jerusalem, directly with the threat that God was going to destroy Old Covenant Israel. You can't separate those two. You can't slip a gap of so far 26, 27, 2,800 years into the period at the end of verse 16 and do any kind of exegetical justice to the text. It just doesn't work. Okay, so then he says, verse 19, "I will rejoice in Jerusalem, joy in my people. The voice of weeping shall no longer be heard in her, nor the voice of crying." Now, once again, we're taken to Revelation chapter 21. in this New Jerusalem, there are no more tears. There's no more crying. We're talking about the same thing. Even though the great majority of commentators say that Isaiah 65 is the end of the world. Now, I'm seeing more and more postmillennialists take the position that Isaiah 65 was talking about AD 70. The destruction of Israel, the new creation, which is the body of Christ. But then, of course, they extrapolate from that and they say, well, AD 70 was a shadow and a foretaste of the coming real end of the age, which means there's another New Jerusalem, there's another new creation. Only this one's real. This one's material. This one's physical. So they have the spiritual new creation, the spiritual New Jerusalem in AD 70, foreshadowing the coming of a literal, physical, material new creation in New Jerusalem. Well, that kind of reverses God's method of operation, his modus operandi. God has always operated from the material to the spiritual. And yet, the position that Isaiah 65 and the prediction of the new heaven and new earth and the new Jerusalem arriving in AD 70 and its spiritual creation, anticipating a yet future material physical new creation, a renovated physical earth, see, that reverses that. But nonetheless, this promise of the new heaven, new earth, and the new Jerusalem is one that the New Testament picks up on. Paul in Galatians chapter 4 contrasts the Old Covenant Jerusalem, the Old Covenant people, and the Old Covenant itself under the allegory of two mountains and two women, two sons. Hagar and Ishmael representing the Old Covenant and the Old Covenant people, contrasted with the Jerusalem that is above, the mother of us all, Paul said, the spiritual children of God. They are children of Abraham by faith, not by family, contrasted with the children of Abraham by family, by blood. Two totally different contrasts. Now notice that he says, the children of the bondwoman, that's Old Covenant Israel, that's Torah, will not be heirs with the children of the free woman. Now, what are they heirs of? They are heirs of the Abrahamic inheritance. What is the Abrahamic inheritance? It's the heavenly city, the heavenly country of Hebrews chapter 11 through 16. Abraham looked for a city whose builder and maker is God. He looked for the New Jerusalem. So here is the Abrahamic promise. Who would inherit that promise? Not the children by blood, but the children by faith. When would that inheritance be? Oh, well, Paul tells us. Cast out the bondwoman and her son. The children of the bondwoman will not be heirs of the children of the free. The inheritance, the Abrahamic inheritance, the New Jerusalem, would be given when the children of the bondwoman, Old Covenant Israel, and the Old Covenant itself was cast out. Folks, that didn't happen at the cross. I'm sorry, that's anachronistic. So here is Paul in Galatians chapter 4 anticipating the coming of the heavenly New Jerusalem of Isaiah chapter 65. Oh, and then we go to Hebrews chapter 12. In Hebrews chapter 12, the writer, contrasting the things of the Old Covenant, like Galatians 4, says, you have not come to Mount Sinai. You have not come to the mountain that could not be touched. And if so much as an animal touches that mountain, it's to be thrust through with a spear. And the people and Moses greatly feared and trembled. But you have come to Mount Zion. You have come to heavenly Jerusalem. That's the Jerusalem of the Abrahamic promise. That's the heavenly Jerusalem that was above in Galatians chapter 4. Now notice what the writer says. He says, you have come. He didn't say one day by and by in a couple of thousand years, you'll finally arrive at it. And by the way, what's the significance of this? Well, Zion is the location, the locus of the resurrection. So for the writer to say, you've come to Mount Zion, is to say that the time of the resurrection had arrived. Hello? And then the writer says in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 14, we do not have here on earth an abiding city. The word abiding there is from the Greek word meno, means abiding, permanent, remaining. But we seek one that is about to come. So that old Jerusalem was about to pass away. Oh, the old Jerusalem was about to be cast out, according to Galatians chapter 4. We seek one that is about to come. Oh, and then we go to Revelation chapter 21. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, because the old heaven and the old earth had passed away, coming down from God out of heaven, adorned as a bride. I wonder if this is the time of the wedding of Revelation 19 and 6. At the destruction of Babylon, which is the old covenant Jerusalem, the old covenant Zion, at the destruction of that city, Revelation 19:6 says, let us rejoice and be glad, for the time of the wedding has come. Do you suppose that's the wedding at the coming of the bridegroom for the wedding of Matthew 25? Well, of course it is. Unless you want to posit two different weddings at two different comings of the Lord. Well, wouldn't that mean there are two different brides? If not, why not? I mean, if you got a wedding here and if you got a wedding there, yeah. So what do we find? Revelation depicts for us the fulfillment of Isaiah 65, the coming of the new heaven and new earth and the new Jerusalem. But you see, that new creation would flow from the destruction of the old. It would flow, flow from the wedding and the wedding banquet of Matthew 25. All of which would take place at the destruction of old covenant Zion, Jerusalem. Hey, listen, don't forget, you got to take advantage. Boy, this is such a fantastic special for you. The February 2021 U.S. orders only special. My book, Like Father, Like Son on Clouds of Glory, regularly $19.95 plus $4.95 shipping. My book, One Root, One Kingdom, All Nations, which totally rebukes and refutes the concept that covenant eschatology teaches replacement eschatology or theology. And by the way, this book definitively answers the Israel only nonsense. And my Gene Fadley's book, Hebrews, Covenant and Contrast. Listen, if you want a real brief, extremely easy understand overview of the book of Hebrews, you need to get this 3-book special. Okay, if you purchased all 3 separately, it would cost you over $61. February 2021, U.S. orders only, total delivered price, $35. Folks, that's going to save you $25, if my math is right, okay? So go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, wonderful banner right up at the very top. Click on the banner, order this February 2021 3-book special. You get this free, okay? I'm just tossing it in. So take advantage of it. And of course, we've got more. We're going to Isaiah 66 in the morning. You don't want to miss it. So I'll see you on the flip side.